The night my wife died, the house did not feel empty at first. It felt loud. The clock on the wall sounded like a hammer. The refrigerator hummed like it was trying to say something. Even the wind outside kept brushing the windows like someone who didn't know how to knock properly. And right in the middle of that unbearable noise, my mother-in-law stood in the doorway of the living room, looking at me with eyes that had aged 10 years in a single day. That was when she said I shouldn't be alone tonight. Asterisk before the story continues. If you believe that kindness and second chances still matter in this world, take a second to like the video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach people who are hurting in silence. Asterisk, her name was Margaret, and until that night she had never once told me what I should or shouldn't do. She had always been polite, distant, the kind of woman who spoke gently, but never let anyone step too close to her heart. My wife Rebecca used to say that her mother loved people quietly, the way a candle burns without making a sound. But when Rebecca passed away that afternoon in a hospital room in Denver, something inside Margaret changed. She didn't cry loudly. She didn't shout. She just looked at me with this strange mixture of grief and responsibility, as if the world had suddenly handed her something heavy she didn't know how to carry. Asterisk, I remember standing in the hallway of the hospital after the doctor left. Everything had been so fast. One moment Rebecca was squeezing my hand and whispering that she felt tired, and the next moment the room had turned into a place where nobody spoke normally anymore. Nurses moved slowly, doctors used quiet voices, and someone gently covered her with a white sheet that felt like the final sentence of a story I wasn't ready to finish. My name is Michael, and in that moment, I didn't feel like a husband. I felt like a stranger who had accidentally walked into the worst chapter of someone else's life. Asterisk, driving home without her was worse than anything I had imagined. The passenger seat looked wrong without her purse. The radio played songs she loved, and I kept turning it off only to turn it back on again because silence felt like falling into a hole. Every traffic light seemed longer than usual. Every street looked darker. When I finally parked in front of the house we had spent 7 years building together, I just sat there with both hands still on the steering wheel, staring at the front door as if it would open and she would walk out laughing at some terrible joke she had heard online, but she didn't, and the house stayed still. Margaret had arrived before me. She had let herself in with the spare key Rebecca gave her years ago. When I stepped inside, the lights were on and the smell of coffee filled the air. It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense anymore. I remember thinking that coffee was something people drank when they were starting a day, not when they were ending a life. Margaret didn't say anything at first. She just took my coat from my shoulders, placed it neatly on the chair near the door, and guided me to the couch the way someone guides a child who doesn't know where to sit. Asterisk, that was when she said I shouldn't be alone tonight. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a command either. It was something in between. Something that sounded like a promise and a warning at the same time. Strangely, for the first time since the hospital, I felt like someone understood the exact shape of the emptiness inside me. Asterisk, Margaret stayed. She didn't talk much, but she didn't leave. She sat in the armchair across from me, holding a small photo of Rebecca from when she was 12 years old. I watched her stare at that picture for a long time, and something inside me broke again. Because I realized that the woman I had lost that afternoon wasn't just my wife. She was someone's daughter, someone's whole world, long before I even knew her name. Asterisk, the night stretched slowly. Every corner of the house reminded me of Rebecca. The blanket folded on the back of the couch that she insisted on keeping even in summer. The little cactus on the windowsill that she watered every Sunday morning as if it were something fragile. The magnets on the refrigerator that she collected from every trip we ever took, even the small ones that didn't mean anything to anyone else. Each object felt like a memory that refused to stay quiet. Asterisk, around midnight, Margaret finally spoke. Again. She didn't ask me how I felt. She didn't try to comfort me with words that would have sounded empty anyway. Instead, she walked into the kitchen and started making soup. It was the same soup Rebecca used to cook whenever I was sick. I watched her move around the kitchen with the same calm rhythm Rebecca had, and for a moment I thought I was imagining everything. The sound of the spoon against the pot felt like a heartbeat. Slow, steady, real. Asterisk when she placed the bowl in front of me. I realized something I had never noticed before. Grief doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it comes with small acts that hold you together when everything else is falling apart. Hey, I didn't say thank you. I just took a spoonful and suddenly felt warmth in a place that had been cold since the hospital. Asterisk, the next few days felt like a blur. People came to the house, brought flowers, said kind things, and left quickly because nobody knows how to stay in a room filled with loss. Margaret stayed the entire time. She slept in the guest room, but woke up before me every morning, made coffee, and opened the curtains the way Rebecca used to. At first I thought she was trying to replace something that could never be replaced. But slowly I understood that she wasn't replacing Rebecca. She was protecting what Rebecca had left behind. Asterisk one afternoon. 3 days after the funeral, I found Margaret sitting on the floor in the hallway, holding one of Rebecca's old photo albums. She wasn't crying. She was smiling in a quiet, almost invisible way. I sat next to her, and for the first time we looked at those photos together. There was Rebecca as a child in a yellow dress. Rebecca at her high school graduation with messy hair and a shy smile. Rebecca on the day we got married in a small church in Colorado Springs, holding my hand so tightly that it hurt, but in the best possible way. Asterisk, that was the moment everything began to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, like the sun coming up without anyone noticing at first. I realized that Margaret wasn't just my wife's mother anymore. She was the only person in the world who loved Rebecca in exactly the same way I did, just from a different side of her life. And for the first time since Rebecca passed away, I didn't feel completely alone. Asterisk, if this story is starting to touch your heart, write one word in the comments right now. Hope. It helps this story reach people who are going through something similar, but don't know how to talk about it. Asterisk, the weeks turned into months. Margaret didn't stay forever, but she didn't disappear either. She came every weekend from her small home in Kansas, bringing homemade food. Small gifts she claimed were leftovers from the pantry, and stories about Rebecca that I had never heard before. Stories about how Rebecca used to stay up late, helping her neighbors with homework. Stories about how she once gave her birthday money to a girl in school who couldn't afford a winter jacket. Stories that made me realize that the woman I married had always been extraordinary. Even before she became my wife. Asterisk, one evening in late autumn, I was sitting alone in the living room when I noticed something strange. The house didn't feel loud anymore. The clock still ticked. The refrigerator still hummed. The wind still touched the windows, but none of it felt unbearable. Instead, it felt like the house was breathing again. I stood up and walked to the window where Rebecca used to stand every morning with her coffee. Outside, the sky was turning orange, and for the first time since her death, I didn't feel like the world had ended. I felt like it had changed, painfully, permanently, but not completely. Asterisk, Margaret called that night. Her voice sounded tired but calm. She asked if I had eaten, the same question Rebecca used to ask every single day. I told her yes, even though I hadn't, and she laughed softly, because she knew I was lying. That small laugh did something inside me. It reminded me that grief doesn't erase love. It just changes the way love lives inside you. Asterisk, a few days later. I decided to do something I had been avoiding for months. I opened Rebecca's closet. At first, the smell of her perfume almost made me close it again. But instead I stayed there, touching the clothes she had carefully arranged. And then I noticed a small envelope hidden between two sweaters. Inside it was a note in her handwriting. It wasn't long, just said that if something ever happened to her, she wanted me to take care of her mother because Margaret had always been stronger for others than for herself. Asterisk, I sat on the floor for a long time holding that note, realizing that even in her absence, Rebecca was still guiding both of us. That was when I understood what Margaret meant that night when she said I shouldn't be alone. She didn't just mean that one night, she meant life. Asterisk, the next weekend. When Margaret arrived, I told her about the note. She didn't cry. She just looked at me with the same expression she had on the night Rebecca passed away, but this time, there was something softer in her eyes, something that felt like peace mixed with pain. We sat together in silence for a while, and then for the first time, We talked about the future instead of the past. Asterisk, it wasn't a dramatic conversation. It was simple. We talked about fixing the small garden Rebecca loved, about keeping her favorite traditions alive, Ab.